And so right now, I would like to call up Representative Takano, and he is here to participate in all of this, and I so appreciate it. He, of course, represents the 41st District. I had to find the exact district it's here, which is a part of the Riverside, Moreno Valley, Harupa Valley, and Paris. And what I particularly am impressed by, he's the first openly gay person of color to be elected in Congress, and currently serves as chair of the House Veteran Affairs. And he was recently on Fox 11 News, taking that position and getting right there on the grounds of the Veteran Administration to talk to those vets who are homeless at this point and suffering greatly during this time period. So, Mark, why don't you come on up to this area here, grab a seat, grab a microphone. I'd also like to introduce the Honorable John Chiang, even though you were late. What is that? Do we call that CP time? What do we call that? So, as you know, he was featured in the documentary, former California State Treasurer. Of course, he ran for governor and California State Controller, and my friend. I'm very happy to see you again. So we're going to call up John Chiang to join the panel as well. As you may have seen, John Kobara's name is part of the credits there. He is our final guest speaker on the panel, and he sits on the Board of Governors here at the Japanese American National Museum. He has a vast experience in managing nonprofits, and so I am so happy to have you all three here. My only regret is I'm the only woman. I'll just point that out. All right, I guess this is where I'm supposed to, oops, that was very unladylike. Sit over here. And do I have a mic? I'm supposed to sit here, right? Yes. Doesn't sound like I'm amplified. Oh my gosh, that's way too much for me to do. So, gentlemen, you probably do a better job than I did in expressing your sentiments watching this documentary. Should we just go from one side to the next to see what your sentiments are? Mark?
Well, I thought it was, sorry, there it goes. I thought it was really an amazing, I think, description and a description of the state of play of where we are. A look back at the history, but also just the long history, but also the recent history that's led us to this place. I liked particularly the description of growing pains. I was thinking of the word birthing pains, but I'm not a woman, so I don't know what else to give birth. But it seemed extremely painful. But that image of, it's a lot of pain right now in the country.
Yeah.
There is a lot of pain. And I would say the hopefulness about that pain is that we can see it as, you know, the beginning of a destruction, or it's the beginning of something better and new, something where we haven't been before. And I think that's what I want to reach toward, what I really do believe. But I can't say that it's not a disturbing time. But as somebody who's in elected office, I don't have the luxury, or anyone in elected office right now doesn't have the luxury of being a pessimist. And I would say any of us that have...
Did you say pacifist or pessimist?
A pessimist.
Okay.
I like to say we have the moral obligation.
You might not have the option to be a pacifist either, so...
No.
At least verbally.
Pacifist or a pessimist. I say at times like these, for those of us who have a place of, say, power, privilege, status, a place of advantage, we have a moral...
platform to speak out.
A platform. But not even if we have a platform. We may be private citizens and not have a platform, but we may be educated and we may be comfortable in life. We have a moral obligation to be optimistic, and we have a moral obligation to be engaged. And I think, you know, knowing my friend Ron Wong and John Kobara, the people who produced this, I think this is a place they come from, and that comes forward at that note of optimism at the end. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Yeah, I was happy that there was the optimism
Yep.
at the end. Okay, John, what about you, your initial response? You caught most of it, didn't you? I saw you sneak in, but you caught most of it. Actually, you were the subject initially, were you not? Wasn't the initial idea that they would follow you on the campaign trail as you ran for governor?
Yes, so I've seen it multiple times.
Okay. No wonder you came late.
Well, actually, I was outside eating.
Another good thing to
It's
do.
no different than my public service career. So, Susan, thank you for moderating. It's great to be with Mark and John. Let me thank JANM for, there's nothing like the power of a convener, right? In our democracy, in our public community spaces, it's important that you have lead actors that convene and bring people together and create community. So, John, thank you, and JANM. And then this is an extraordinary testament to Ron Wong's both personal and professional life. This is Ron's vision, and frankly, it ought to be America's vision. And as Mark so appropriately said, and as you referenced in some of your comments in response to Mark, Susan, these are extraordinary moments. Right? A lot of the comments about President Obama wouldn't be relevant today because they are very, very different times, even though it was not that long ago. And so I just want to put it in a context, right? John Kaji, where are you? I can't see with all the, so John's up there. John texted me this morning. So John is a proud USC graduate, a great leader for the USC alumni community. My choice, right, and I know this is a nonprofit for a certain city election race, a long time. I happen to live in Torrance.
Fill in the blanks.
He texted me about an act that was long overdue by USC, recognizing that during World War II, they expelled or didn't allow students of Japanese American heritage to complete their studies. And ignominiously, they did not allow them to return. So, right, more than half a century later, right, this week, right, they finally make some amends, right, and so it's a big step, but it's not enough, right? It doesn't really fully restore the dignity and the pain and the hurt that those Japanese Americans lost from their lives, and still so many of them are proud. And Joanne Kumamoto, in addition to John, was referenced in that article. So John, thank you for your leadership and strong advocacy.
15 years, he told me, was the struggle.
And so I just want to juxtapose that act with the times we are today and Ron's vision, right? Because we're thinking what's the relevance? Is it that distant? No. Right, we're seeing today, as Mark said, reference, we're seeing Ronald Reagan was also quoted in that. So here's another Ronald Reagan quote. Democracy, freedom is never more than a generation away from extinction, right? That's the battle we have. And within subcomponents that we're going to talk about is the fact that race is an important issue. So I just want to thank Ron for putting all this work and bringing up an important topic. And if we're going to try to bring a better future into the present, we need to act upon that.
All right, now, John, what is it that you want the viewers to take away and for it to continue to resonate past this moment in time?
Yeah, thank you. It's so nice to be with you, Susan, and Mark and John. And
John,
people.
did you grow up watching Me Too since you were a little boy?
No.
I'm teasing.
No, I've watched you, but but just anyway. No, I'm not gonna go there. I just want to say, first of all, folks that have put themselves out. Ron has spent his career really helping people run for office and think about people that have the courage to be out there in the public limelight and represent all of us, and particularly Asian Americans, is really critical. I've seen the film in its development a number of times, and it is an emotional roller coaster for me because I have personal and emotional thoughts about the things and the anxiety and challenges that people are facing today. But what I want people to come out of this, and some of us have seen some of this, literally this movie over and over and over, and in the repetition we have to remind ourselves that people don't know this history. And then when we've shown this film to younger people in their 30s who are highly educated, went to the best schools, they don't really understand this history. They understand some of the things that are going on today, and the Stop Asian Hate is the thing we're talking about, but that's not the real goal. That's not the prize. The prize is really about full representation, about people engaging themselves fully in their communities, in their lives, representing themselves as Asian Americans, and representing all people, but being at the table to help understand corporations and nonprofits and foundations and the process of politics to engage Asian Americans and the needs of Asian Americans that aren't just the highest income families. There is a spectrum there that people don't fully understand. And if we don't get engaged, and we don't help the young people engage and understand this history and their sense of the sacrifices that have been made for us to be here today, under the great auspices of the Japanese American National Museum and Ann Burroughs' leadership, I think that's the outcome, Susan, that we want, is people to see the film, not just to the, yes, I know the history, I don't know the history. What are you going to do? And while Ron and James want everybody to run for office, and I wouldn't mind everybody running for office, there are some steps before we can run for office that everybody can take to be more engaged in their lives, to be more present, and to be leaders in their communities before you even run for office and in the city of Torrance or other places. But ultimately, we want this to stir up a sense of, I think Evan mentioned it, the sense of obligation, the sense of duty that we have to be our whole selves and to represent our whole selves in the communities and places of decision-making everywhere. So that's my aspiration. Thank you.
So my little origination story is that when I was growing up here in Los Angeles, Connie Chung was on TV, Tricia Toyota was on TV, Joanne Ishimina was on TV, Sam Chulin was on TV. My joke is, if I hadn't seen them, maybe I wouldn't have thought, can I do that? Maybe I should go to college and think about that path. If you see it, you can be it. And that's kind of part of the point of this story or this documentary is there aren't enough Asian American leaders, spokespersons, politicians. How do we change that? Mark, what do you think? I mean, you had the bravery and the courage to run and win an office. How did you do that? I would never do it.
It's either bravery or courage or, foolishness, who knows. But, my origination story is actually watching it was a couple of things. I knew about Norman Mineta. I knew about Bob Matsui. And I certainly knew about Senator Inouye. So that was always in the background. I mean, as a young person, I had examples of Asian Americans. I certainly, but I think the person who made a big impression on me was Barbara Jordan. I was a strange child. I was at 12 years old, 13 years old, watching the gavel judiciary impeachment proceedings. I got into that. And my grandfather was an Issei and smoking his cigarettes behind me. And he's like, well, why do you keep watching the roll call votes? That you know how it's going to end. And but the irony is that he was somebody for whom the Constitution had failed. And I was being inspired by a black woman who was, I think, in her freshman year, speaks so eloquently about her belief and faith in the Constitution that was whole, complete. I can't remember the whole, but it was like whole, I can still hear her.
And willing to stand alone.
Well, and she says, look, I sit here as an inquisitor today. Who would think how unlikely? And somehow I was very inspired by that, and it led me along with, she represented possibility to me. And but I think I understand the importance of representation. I get LGBTQ Asian interns who this has been very recent, who said it was that to see me in office made them think it was something that they could do. It was the first time they saw someone that was not only was Asian, but it was also LGBTQ. It was the intersection. So when we show up, showing up is part of the big challenge, is to show up. Ever since I got elected, we've been adding more members of Congress who are AAPI. Under Judy Chu's leadership, Grace Meng, we have grown more diverse in terms of gender, and have grown our membership. I am heartened to see that we've seen a jump and a spike in participation among voters, Asian AAPI voters. They did make the difference in Georgia, and they did make the difference in Nevada. And it was no mistake. It was like a significant jump in participation. So something about what happened this past year, I think, really has sparked something within the AAPI community.
It's kind of a galvanization.
I would say so. And John, I think I'm really struck by what you said about that there is a very smart 30-something set that may not be aware of the Vincent Chin story. I certainly know that. I mean, I'm old enough to know about that Vincent Chin story and felt it. And I remember running for office in 1992 for the first time for Congress. And the question that other Japanese Americans would ask me at the time is, what about all this Japan bashing? What about all this Japan bashing? And I'm seeing history repeat itself with the very anti-China, whipped up sentiment. Steve Bannon going out there and really whipping up an extreme point of view about China. Very similar sort of moment. So,
Yeah. John, how do you want to respond to the whole, we need more people out there that are faces in politics and in the boardrooms?
Sorry, Susan. First thing I want to say was Mark Takano was too smart in 1992 when he was running for Congress. He calls me up and, do you remember what we talked about? He's talking about John Locke's contract theory, right? I was going like, Mark, you're so Harvard. I go, nobody in Riverside wants to talk about John Locke's contract theory when you're knocking on doors. Well, not talking to the doors, but talking to me. So we need to build the infrastructure, and again, kudos to Ron for building the infrastructure, right? He has leadership programs that train young individuals that want to run for public office. The API community is so behind in so many respects to the infrastructure. When you talk about it from an ethnic perspective, when you talk about it from a race perspective, on so many other different fronts. In 1997, when I assumed office, the Asian caucus in the state legislature and constitutional offices, there were 4 of us. There was Republican Matt Fong, who was the state treasurer. I was on the Board of Equalization. We had then Assembly Member Mike Honda, and from Ventura County, didn't represent all of Ventura County, Republican Assembly Member now Takasugi. And frankly, when you have 2 APIs, that's not much of a caucus, right? So when we would try to, a couple years later, lobby Gray Davis, it's really hard when you only have a couple members, right? It's like, Mike, do you want to make this call or do you want us to make call, right? We got a million asks. How do we prioritize all of that? So part of this is that when Judy Chu got elected into office, we went to the state Democratic Party. I'm not sure what Matt and the others did. And we said, hey, you need to hire API staff. And they said, okay, we're not opposed to it, but you got to raise the money for it, right? And when you're a candidate, right, you're trying to raise for your own reelection race. It's hard enough raising money for your own reelection race, more or less trying to raise, but we would try to do other things. And so I support diverse candidates. One of the things I try not to do that you see with so many others is that I want to make sure all people have an opportunity to serve in government, right? We have a constitutional republic that I think is best served when you have elected officials who are from diverse communities, who are sensitive to those communities, that work with people on the ground, right? That's fundamentally what we're debating today, right? Does America, for this next generation, maintain its constitutional republic, or do we go to some other type of government, right? When you have, try not to get too partisan here, right? Over 100 members of Congress, right? Unwilling to certify elections, right? You really have to think about how we have to preserve this democracy, our freedom, our constitutional republic. So part of that is making sure that you have people who understand our sense of greater identity.
Absolutely. John, I wanted to tell you that I was at an event on Tuesday where Lisa Ling was honored. And this was a primarily Asian American crowd, mostly women. And she mentions the 442nd. And she looks out over the audience and says, who knows who I'm talking about? I didn't raise my hand, even though I, of course, do know. But it was surprising that in this Asian American crowd, that so few people raised their hands. And it speaks to, sometimes we don't even know our own stories within this really diverse community. And that is, speaking to the documentary, why it's so difficult, I think, we are not monolithic. And so to get that main force of energy and power and persuasion, I think it's been a challenge. So how, this will take a step, but what else needs to be done in order to make us, make Asian Americans have a voice, a bigger voice?
When Ron and I started talking about this film and we started seeing versions of it, and what I loved about it was embedded in a nonprofit in the Asian Pacific American Leadership Foundation, and the sense of training and engagement that represented. And so what Ron and I have talked about with James and Tony and the team is that every time, this is the first public showing of it, we want to get on some streamer. We'd love to see a lot of eyeballs on this film. But the real beauty of the project that Ron has envisioned is that we go to communities, small, medium, and large, and we show the film, we engage people, and people will rise up and say, it's my time, I need to get more engaged. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do that. There's people that are already engaged. We want to accelerate that engagement. But there are people that are going to awaken, and they are awakening. But what do they do now? How do they get engaged? And the Asian Pacific American Leadership Foundation has trainings. We would make those trainings available to them to deepen their understanding of their own identity, their history, their sense of opportunities, plug them in locally, when we go to Atlanta, when we go to Chicago, when we go to San Francisco, we will plug people in locally. And our idea is to just start a ripple effect. It's not to just take names and try to hit them up for different things. It's trying to engage them in something. But they have to raise their hand. So it's a film that could catalyze people's interest in being more engaged, because what happens, Evan Lowe talked about it, we just sort of blur in. We start to assimilate in. We start to just get comfortable. And we take things for granted. And we can't. And our opportunities to be more engaged in not only the political life, but the community life of our places, our kids' schools, are the nonprofits that are out there, to show that Asians are engaged in the familiarity of Asians. What happens is people don't know Asians. They don't understand it. They stereotype us. And all of us can tell the stories about being the first and only in everything that's ever happened. And we have to change that dynamic by not just showing them a film and where they have a moment, go, wow, that's impressive, interesting, and we forget about it, but to find those people that say, I'm ready, and plug them in.
Well, I like to think that there is a younger generation now, and they may have been sort of prompted and galvanized by the anti-Asian hate incidents. I was trying to examine myself on what it's been like, growing up in the city of Los Angeles and then going on television and being a journalist, and why I didn't take a stronger role in the newsroom, as in, look, we need to do this story. I was talking to John Kaji about the USC story, which unfortunately was eclipsed by the Mark Ridley Thomas story. And it's a great story. I would love to do the story. And I guess my point is there was a time when I thought it was impressed upon me, yes, you're there because you have an Asian face and name, but you're not really supposed to be an advocate. You're supposed to, cover the news objectively. So I asked this panel, especially the politicians, former politicians, whether or not you have been sidelined for being Asian American, or felt as if maybe now is not the time to bring up something that is very specific to an Asian American cause. Mark, is that something, or do you ever have to fight that, or is that just, no, this is my role and this is who I am? And
I would say it's more, this is my role and who I am. I would say that the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, all of us, most all of us felt the need to not be passive. Look, we were on 24-hour call with this last administration. Every new antic, everything required a pushback. And, even we made clear to the Biden campaign, that there had to be certain standards that had to be upheld when you're campaigning. The messaging, we would not allow the campaign to go anywhere near where Trump was going. And so we took our role very seriously.
and may I just interject? Because didn't we run into a situation with the nascent Biden administration where there wasn't a major Asian American figure in the cabinet?
Well, that did not go down well with me or a lot of the members, and I led a letter for a very, very good public servant right here in California. So that's my point. We weren't shrinking violets during any of this time, but even though our numbers have been growing, it's more than 2. It's still, we need more clout. We don't have enough people in the House of Representatives to be in every room where it happens. I just want to reiterate the point that both Johns have made. The need for staff. Staff is the breeding ground. So when John Kobara, when John Kobara talks about the many steps, when I see young people interning and then using that internship to get their foot into the highly competitive staff. I'm recalling now the JACL political training, leadership training that I went through when I was a very young man. And of course, I'm going to offer if you'll think it's valuable, to be able to pay it forward and to make myself available for those trainings.
Wow.
And so I'm hoping,
That's very impressive, and it's now on video media here.
Well,
so.
I don't think, I'm not going to go regret it, because who made a big difference was that Norm Mineta took the time to be at that training, and he spent hours with young people. He spent hours with me. So, I know John, John Chiang would do the same. I just know the people that who serve who would do the same. So I hear your vision of taking the film on the road, making the trainings available. I'll work my schedule and make sure that I can be in different places. But I think as far as the steps that it takes to get involved, that kind of training is also important. But it's also, I think, important for us to also emphasize that not everybody has to be involved in this role. For those private citizens who are involved in community or want to get involved, there's a way for you to participate too. It's your job, it's your responsibility also to be supportive financially. And it takes a lot of people to do that. But I also want to emphasize one more thing. The thing that Gary South mentioned about media, and we don't have an Al Sharpton, we don't have, and I don't know if we...
Yeah, that was a good point. That was an interesting point.
It is an interesting point. I don't know if we're actually going to need that. What I do think we need is something more like what the LGBT community has with GLAAD, the anti-defamation. They have this huge organization that's funded with millions of dollars from the industry. And they have full-time people monitoring the media, the news media, the movies, film, everything. When a person was really upset in New York about a segment that had occurred pre-pandemic, where it was like a reality dating show, and they were down in like Singapore or one of the Asian countries, and they were showing Americans being disgusted by the food. and reactions. And there was an offense taken. I knew what I would do if something anti-LGBT or homophobic would happen. There would have been an organization to deal with that. The Anti-Defamation League. The Anti-Defamation League is
Absolutely.
we don't quite have that in the AAPI community. Something of that sophistication and organization, that takes resources. And I think we also should do what the other groups do, which is to actually ask the industry to help us fund it. So anyway, I've taken a long time, but I want to get that point
There was
across.
MANA, or there is MANA, but the Media Action Network for Asian Americans, but small, much smaller and not funded. So, John, what is your response to all this?
So before I immediately answer this question, let me elaborate further on the prior question that you asked John about members of our community not knowing about our history. We need to share the story about the history of our community to others outside of our community. So oftentimes in public office, and I'm sure Mark gets it, when we talk about some of the issues, they go, "You're new to this country. You don't understand our issues, right? You guys haven't been in the battles," right? And I explain the right to a public education, as decided by the United States Supreme Court, involved the Chinese American, right? The definition of who is an American citizen involved the Supreme Court decision involving a Chinese American. There'd be a lot more Chinese Americans and other Asians, right, if we didn't have the Chinese Exclusion Act. So it was not the members of the community and their unwillingness to participate. It was the outside forces that said, "We didn't want you," right, and we're going to limit the opportunities from those from the Asia continent to come into the United States of America. So it's not like we haven't made our contributions. Part of this, we have to share that. And part of that is, and Mark talked about Asian American elected officials standing up. I always try to be, as I mentioned earlier, supportive of everybody in the political process, right? Those who weren't getting a voice at the table. In my 20 years in elected office, I only counted 6 times when a non-Asian American raised the issues of Asian Americans in a meeting, right? Now, part of that, sometimes some wanted to afford the courtesy to me, but a lot of times they just didn't bring it up. Some of you know and you see the effort today to diversify America's corporate boards, right? That's an effort I spearheaded in California. I led that effort in 2008. I said we need more people of color on corporate boards. I said we need more women on corporate boards, right? You had Avon, which sells cosmetic to women, and back then they had an all-male board. With no disrespect, right? Don't we think women would understand the products they use better and can provide perhaps better business acumen, market intelligence, firsthand experience? They certainly know the math as well as men, right? You find qualified, right, all across the board, right? And I push for more climate change expertise and more LGBTQ representation, right? Because of America, if we're going to be competitive in the global economy, right, you can't leave anybody behind. And so your question also talks about getting to your second question, and how do you involve people? We need to think about a different frame. Why I mentioned earlier in my comments, the President Obama today versus back then, America looks at the world very differently. So people will talk, well, we have all these unspoken people in the middle. If you read David French's article last week, 52% of Trump voters believe we should split up America. 41% of Biden voters believe we should split up America, right? We've lost that collective identity of ourselves as Americans, right? And that's why this is a microcosm of what's happening in the United States of America. I saw some poll earlier, right, and it's a segment, I'm not saying all white people, right? Some segment, I think it was part of the Republican base, where 81% or 82% of white voters feel they're going to be subject to discrimination, right? Part of this is as we try to grow and make America more inclusive, it's not our intent to scare white people, right? We don't want any American to be afraid, right? We just have to understand we all come from different places, right? White people aren't homogenous, right? Right? And so we have to appreciate the nuances of individuals and character. So when you talk about early childhood examples, so I'm named after John F. Kennedy. My brother's named after Robert Kennedy, so they were certainly my heroes. But growing up in suburban Chicago, Martin Luther King was my childhood hero. And like you, I watched the Watergate hearings. So my mom, right, my mom is a loving but tough Asian mom, right? Taiwanese immigrants where, you know, you tested into your school, so she wanted to make sure we got great grades. The only time, so I hated summers because I had to play piano all day, but she let me watch the Watergate hearings. Right? So mine was, so who I got watching that was Senator Inouye, right? Okay. For me, never seeing an Asian American on TV, especially, you know, in a government setting, right, who lost part of his arm serving and defending and fighting for this country when Japanese Americans were being discriminated against, right? I was raised Catholic, right? I saw Father Drinan, right? Here you have a Catholic priest, right, from Massachusetts. I thought the only thing wrong with it, I was born in New York, so I'm a Yankees fan, right? So I was like, priest, 6 degrees, lawyer, right? I was going, God, he's great, except he's from Boston, right? Sam Dash, right? Another Father Robert, you know, Drinan, who I just mentioned, right? I had him in, I took 2 classes with him because he was known as one of the easiest graders at Georgetown. But it's watching, as you pointed, Susan, who you saw, it's who I saw, right? And so there is a pathway to that leadership. And then last point, we have to build the infrastructure. So when I was going on LinkedIn and I was going through the people who signed up for this, all of you can make a difference, right? If we're gonna make progress, we have to do it together, right? Ron highlighted this important issue, but if we need to be smart about this because America, as I started to talk about, thinks and frames differently. So if you look at people today, there are a lot of Democrats who don't know Republicans. There are a lot of Republicans who don't know Democrats. There are a lot of people in this country who don't have a single Asian in their life, right? So when you talk about, you know, what happened against the Japanese Americans can never happen again, yes, it can, right? Because we don't have that same, the connectedness, right? We don't have those connections with people who are diverse from us. And the political leadership, right, both on the right and the left, and what Mark said, it can't be just Asian Americans advocating against Asian hate, right? You need Joe Biden, you need Donald Trump saying it is simply unacceptable, right? You have to get into both frames. So whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a Republican, in your circles, you need to do it. And so I saw some of you are in the data analytics. Susan and others are great media experts, right? Early on the anti-hate campaign, we had a lot of prominent Asians in entertainment saying stop the hate, but that's not gonna work unless we are smart like a business and we're smart like a political campaign. You gotta understand what message works for whom and who's the proper conveyor and how you build institutions around that so that you have constant penetration, and then you need the political, corporate, community leadership to tamper down what the former president did to make some of this bias, discrimination, and hatred unacceptable in America.
Hear, hear. John Kobara, do you want to talk about, if I take a slight left turn and say this is an interesting time in pop culture because so many things are beloved that are Asian. BTS, Asian food. I love that little snippet of going to the SGV, and I know people who do like food tours and tours in San Gabriel Valley, and yet it's coupled with this rise in Asian hate. And P.S., it's still going on. It might not always be on the Fox 11 News, but there are still incidents. It's still happening. I just read one today that just made me very sad indeed. Do you find that in this interesting period of time where these things can coexist?
So I just want to go back to the ADL kind of thing because, you know, one of our new producers is Next Shark, and there are new media organizations that are emerging, Asian American ones, that are reporting hate crimes. They're reporting on the new trends and reporting on Asian leadership. So we have to also engage them in this way, because I think, going back to your first question, the future is about the new leaders that are emerging. We need to lead from where we have our power and our position now, but really engaging that leadership. So to your question, I think, Susan, we've had this challenge where, we deal with racism and discrimination with tourism. Even Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, in many places, is just a time to have food and maybe some, moments of culture, and we're not dealing with the issues. So I find that the juxtaposition of, we like the food and, we like the culture, BTS or whatever it is, or Squid Game, whatever's happening. But I think it goes back to me on the ground, toe to toe, in the community, having conversations, having visibility, and raising the issues, not just to be, we count two, but to bring reality to these conversations. And I find it, I talked to a school board member at a local school board recently, and he was talking about, and he happens to be white, and it's a school that has 40% Asian. And I said, do you guys disaggregate the data? Are you looking at the issues of Asians? You go, Asians are doing fine. I said, no, you haven't disaggregated the data. And this is where this issue of, we're not represented in polls, we're not represented in the data analytics. When New York City was, I think 2018, John will know, he knows all these things. When Asian Americans were determined to be the lowest income population in the city of New York, it freaked out the entire system of nonprofits, because they didn't have an Asian strategy to serve low-income Asians. So, this is the kind of stuff that where the stereotypes, the model minority, gets lost, I think, in a world where we put too much value on celebrity, too much value on some of these issues. I'm not saying we shouldn't enjoy the food and enjoy the music and the movies, but our issues and our ability to assert ourselves can get lost in the fog of culture, I think.
Okay, so what do you think? I'm going to go back to that question about what is the big organization or the big mouthpiece that will make the difference. Is it an Asian American governor, president? Anyone can answer at this point.
Well, I do,
Or another GLAD, as you pointed out?
So I do think we need something like that. We're not a monolithic community. We're made of many sub-ethnicities, but we do understand that when a president of the United States says Kung flu, which I thought was one of the most offensive things I've ever heard in my life, that it was aimed at Chinese and China virus, but all of us knew in America that it would come back on all of us. And so we have our sub-ethnicities, but we understand instinctively. Those of us who remember the Vincent Chin, Vincent Chin was thought to be a Japanese
Right.
Person. He was, of course, a Chinese American. And so that's the generalized way, the generalization of the hate or the blame shifting or the scapegoating.
But how do you get to that point, though, where people have a better understanding, especially back to the whole idea that there are so many subcultures and ethnicities?
I do think that a lot of things need to happen all at once. So we do need an organization that's well-funded, that has enough staff to monitor this stuff, to immediately push back powerfully.
Right.
That's something when somebody calls me, the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus is not equipped to. We have one or two staff people. I couldn't tap into. I knew where we'd go if this was an LGBTQ incident. There was a network of people I could have called immediately. Yeah. That doesn't really exist for generally the AAPI community. I think we have the opportunity. I was heartened to see like $250 million from some Asian philanthropists founded this Asian American Foundation. That's the beginning of something that I think is potentially powerful. But I think I go along with what John Chiang says, that you know, it's not just about us advocating for ourselves. It's also the accountability that we all advocate for each other. That we're there for, you know, I'm being criticized right now for having shown up at a Black Lives Matter rally. I'm being a target of, that's a criticism for, look, he's part of, you know, he's not one of us because he's out there doing that in the community. But I think that's part of what we've got to do. We've got to rebuild a sense of we're all in it together. This balkanization of America is really our biggest vulnerability right now. The sense that when Speaker Pelosi or Joe Biden, they go and meet with our foreign leaders, there's this sense that America's back. Sanity's back. I mean, the adults are back in the room in the White House and in Washington. But the question among our foreign allies is, for how long? For how long? And that for how long question comes back to the disunity and the animosity that we have within our ranks. And so how we break through that is going to be a huge, huge challenge. And it points to, well, it does point to leadership. It does point to encouraging, nurturing. I love the leadership development that you guys are doing. But leadership within our own communities, but leadership generally, we see how important it is that we have leaders that lead responsibly and speak responsibly and act responsibly. And we cannot allow a normalization, which is what I see happening, and frankly, it's happening in the Republican Party. And in
Normalization meaning the Trump attitude?
Normalization of Trumpiness and Trumpism. The putting on loudspeaker, the racial epithets. I mean, who would have ever thought? I mean, Kung Flu is something I would imagine an 8th grader to use. And even 8th graders today would even call out other 8th graders, and to see it happen by the person who led the nation, to use that term, I mean, I'm almost speechless. I'm speechless right now.
He was called out, but then continued to use it.
Well, and then even in the 2016 election, for him to be called out and say, well, you just used the words that Mussolini used. And he kind of brushed it off and said, oh, so Mussolini was a strong leader. Talk about a disconnection from history. I mean, if that had been done in 1960, within the fresh reaches of World War II and who Mussolini was, but, you know, Americans in this, you know, in 2016, it was excused. And that's, I mean, I'm harkening back to what John is talking about, reconnecting and connecting us to history. Well, how about this other fact, John Chiang, about, like, I tell people incredulously, for most of this country's founding, since the very first immigration law they passed in this country, naturalization for Asian immigrants was proscribed. A pathway to citizenship for my Issei grandfather in 1916 was not possible for most of his life, and I tell that to dreamers today. You know, the idea that someone could not be a part of this country, could not naturalize for most, it wouldn't happen for him until like 1965 when they passed the immigration law. And they forget that the immigration law of 1965 was part of that panoply of civil rights laws. It was an evening out of stuff. But think about that. Asian immigrants could not naturalize for most of this country's history.
I'm going to take a more narrow view to the, or narrow road to answering that question. So when former President Trump makes a comment, right, you can have an Asian American civil rights leader, you can have a Jewish American civil rights leader, somebody else speak. That, frankly, in most instances isn't going to work, right? Because they're already speaking to an audience or who they're going to appeal to is an audience that is already finds that message repulsive. What you need is bold leadership from people, from other Republicans. You need like George Bush or Condoleezza Rice. You need to get within the Republican base and the Trump populist base, right? Kevin McCarthy, if he had the courage, right, or the moral fortitude, or the 7 or 10 or however Republican congressmen that stood up to President Trump, right? And I'm not trying to attack, but as a tactic, right? You needed somebody within that base. You need evangelical Christians, members of the leadership of Church of Latter-day Saints, rich Republican contributors, part of the conservative base, to say we disagree strongly with the president, right? We are, Susan, when you were kind enough to have me interview, right? My last comments were, I miss the old Republicans, right? Where were the fiscally conservative Republicans, right, who stood for family values, right, saying what's happening here is wrong, right? We're proud Republicans, but we disagree respectfully with our president on these race issues or these other issues. America's stronger when we're together, and we recognize everybody's value.
So, Vicki Nguyen, I'm one of her producer's friends, so I was very privy to a lot of things that Vicki was doing with the Today Show. And the woman who spoke out to the president, who said, why do you do that, and why are you looking at me? Because she's Asian. In the press corps, it was often the Asian American who said, maybe you shouldn't be saying that, and the people are, my people are suffering for it. Shouldn't it have been, somebody else in the press corps too? Let's call everybody out and say, it should have been somebody that was not Asian American to point out, that's offensive, don't do that. And then coupled with having a Mitt Romney or a Kevin McCarthy step forward and say, let's kind of recognize what the real issue is. The real issue is COVID-19, not a population, not an Asian American population, community. They're not responsible for this. So it needed to be that community, that sense of community. It's appalling. Now I'm editorializing and should not. That didn't happen like that. So, and that was an aside. All my other little comments. But John, this is where you take over the main microphone and accept questions from the audience so that the filmmakers can come forward.
First of all,
correct?
thank you, Susan, for doing this part, and Mark and John. Appreciate it. I'd love to get Ron Wong and Tony Hsu up here if we could make a little shift. And I know it's getting late, guys, and some people are trying not to look at the Dodger game. I have not, but wanted to just to get Tony and Ron up here. Just a couple things. One of the things we're trying to do is, again, in this first showing, and we've done this showing a couple times, is raise awareness, to get feedback from you, to get your support, and I'll tell you, we're trying to raise some money to get this show on the road, there is a little sheet that you should pick up about if you want to just send us even after this about thoughts and ideas, but we are looking for people to engage with us and help us with the film. But I think what I'd like to do, just given the hour right now, and everybody's great investment of time, is just take some feedback, questions, thoughts that people have from the audience. I think I can see you with the lights. You can just raise your hand, and we'll call on a few people and just try to have a brief discussion. This is where you're just gonna, we don't want to have long speeches, but we would love to hear thoughts and comments. If there's somebody that wants to raise a question or thought.
Great. So let me just start by saying I want to thank JANM. This is our first public showing, and we couldn't have thought of a better place to do this. Thank you, Ann, for opening up JANM, and John Kobara for making this happen. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that Susan's comments were exactly why we created this film, not for the media's sake, but I grew up watching Trisha Toyota and Connie Chung, and you're the next generation and the generation after and the generation. But having someone in the media and people that look like us, and to know that, to see you on the news, not while I was growing up as a child, but as an adult, means so much, because you're, absolutely, that's the point. When we see a John Chung, in office, running for governor. And I need to spend a moment on and acknowledge Tony as well for helping translate. A lot of people have heard that this was an idea that I had, but Tony really had to stay with me for the last 3 years to make this happen. So when we thought about John's race for governor, and I think this is an important point, and when you think of a more dedicated and epitome of a public servant, John Chiang comes to mind. What he had stood for, what he has done in the course of the 30, 40 years, we had met 35 years ago, but his steadfast leadership. But then, enter Gavin Newsom, right? And Gavin Newsom, no offense to Gavin Newsom, he's hit the genetic jackpot, and he comes out of central casting, but he really epitomizes white privilege in a way. And when you juxtapose someone who's worked hard, that represents an American success story as a child of immigrants who came with very little, we thought that was an interesting story to start unpacking some of these broader issues, and not just like, your typical political movie where we follow the candidate around, but really unpack what it means and why people have biases and explore those biases and how they vote, and why we don't have a supervisor here in LA, why we barely have an LA City Councilman, David Rue lost, and we have others, but still, there are biases that we face as a community when we step up to take leadership. So it's not just about stepping up to be leaders, it's understanding what it takes and what we're faced with. And not only to be leaders as a governor or as a controller or treasurer or president, but even in the CEO world or as leaders and things that the glass things that we have. That's why I wanted to riff off of Susan's point. When you see Tricia Chioda or Connie Chung, then it gives us hope, and those barriers become less. So that was really the impulse for the movie, but history and recent history guided this thing along Trump, and that's why Tony helped bring this into reality in terms of the vision and telling the story of where we are today. But as my good friend John Kobara came in, John was like a lot of you here that was just watching from afar and stepped up and said, I want to be a part of this, bringing his great expertise to help us put the grassroots component together, help us push it along. So this is not anything that's done in the can in the sense that it's a tool for these kinds of discussions that we can keep this moving. We want to get big eyeballs on this film. We want to get it on distribution. But even if it was on Netflix and you could see it there as the movies to watch, with no publicity, nobody's going to watch a film like this, right? It doesn't. Politics is not an interesting issue, but we still need a movement behind it, and that was the original attempt in trying to make this film in the way that we did. Also, going back to the original story, we felt that John's story needed to be told, that it's just not an afterthought, that an Asian American in our generation could be credible for governor. It needed to be highlighted. So anyway.
Let's ask Tony. Tony, these guys have been friends for a million years. They've really never been involved with politics or anything like that. Tony's done lots of different types of media things in China, in the United States, had a lot of success. Working on some crazy projects right now. We're not going to talk about that. But what was it like for you to work with your friend and also to really get involved with politics?
Yeah, so Ron was always into politics, and I was always into film, so I wasn't that involved with politics at all. So 3 years ago, Ron came to me and told me about his vision and his idea. And I was really interested because as a 12-year-old immigrant who come to America, what he was talking about, all the bias incidents and the racist incidents, I myself have experienced it. And, I have a son and daughter. My son is here. And knowing that they gonna grow up in this country and face racism and bias, I wanted to do something that I could do to help them understand that if they face bias and racism, it's not because it's their fault or there's something wrong with them. I wanted them to know that it is a system and it goes back in history that that there was a lot of racism before them, and I want them to feel like they belong in this country, and I want them to understand why their bias and racism toward them. So that was actually the intention to do this film. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. And you know, this has been a journey of blood, sweat, and tears, of endurance to see this film come to this level, and it's really a tribute to these two gentlemen's stick-to-itiveness, and the fact that they are still friends is a good thing. So, other comments, questions, suggestions? I just want to make sure that if there's anybody else who has, yes. So, you know, we've done this a few different times, and we get a lot of great feedback, and we really do want to get into the education mainstream. But really, what we want to do is get this film in its entirety right now, what it is, in a conversational style with communities and in different places. I mean, if it's on big streamers, great. To get it involved where we can start to have conversation and leadership development of the people that are engaged. I mean, that's where I think a movement at a very small level is going to have a bigger impact. There are a lot of ideas about what we could do with the film. And so somebody said the last time we showed it, you should have a series, there should be 5 of these films. And we said, yeah, that'd be great. But we only have 1 film now. And we're dealing with this film, and it's a great idea. And we should think about translations, and we should think about other things. But how do we get this film to start those conversations and maybe engage other people with other versions of this and iterations of it and derivations of it? So that's kind of the focus. Yes. Great. Well, I'm not going to belabor this. There's a little sheet of paper that you should pick up just to email us with ideas and thoughts that you've handed. And you can, if you want to write notes on that and send it to us right now, you can do that. But we'd love your thoughts, and obviously if you know people that are yourselves who want to even give small amounts of money to advance this work, we're doing that. I haven't told Ron, but and I talked to a donor on the phone when I was driving in from my house out in the desert today to come here, who's going to give us match an additional amount of contribution that I'm going to make, and my wife and I are going to make, to match anything that anybody else gives here. So we have $20,000 to match gifts. So we're gonna, if you're of any size, to the work we're doing, because the next level of this thing is to get the funds to get to the next screening and the next screening and the next screening. That's what we're doing. We're funding screenings and trainings is what we really want to do. And so we're talking to people right now, individuals, organizations. We're talking to these things called employee resource groups, which are in corporations, these Asian employee resource groups that want to host these leadership development programs within companies. That's what we're going next. That's the grassroots campaign where we generate interest and people to show up. Because I think that, and they may run for office. I'm not making light of them running for office because that's what Ron's work is, but I want people to take steps, and that may lead to even greater representation. So, Ron, anything else you would like to say for the good and welfare?
I just want to thank everyone for being here and taking the time to come and watch a film like this. And I hope it moved you, and I know it's moved at least us, the makers, and just seeing the reaction out of people, you know, to take an issue like this and the moment of time that we're in, and what everyone is saying, what do we march for? And I think that answer is clear, but it's actually in all of us. And to see our friends step forward, Mr. Kobara, people at JANM and others, John, he's come to every single show, and you know he's here because he truly believes everything that he's ever done in public life, whether he's the honorable quote unquote or not. But I want to thank all of you, to Mary Sue, others, Grace. You know, I bet you want to know why Mark really Thomas info didn't come out earlier, but Grace over here, she went through our program. She ran for LA City Council against Mr. Thomas. But thank you, everyone, and keep committed. It's good to see John's son. Maybe there's a political future in you one day. And Tony's son. So thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. And Jessica, of course, from the Public Works, LA City. Thank you.
I want to also thank Susan. I was actually really touched when you were very emotional up here. I just want to say I must sing this film 1,000 times. My son can say that because he watched me edit the film. And 1,000th time after I watch this film, I actually still get emotional. I get teary after editing and finish the film. And also I wanted to say when I was interviewing John, Evan, and they were talking about their story of being discriminated against, I felt like that was my story. So I just feel like I hope I would get more chance to make more films like this to tell our story from our point of view and our perspective. And there's a saying that until the lion is able to create his own story and write their own story and tell their own story, the hunter is always going to be glorified and be the hero. So we got to be that lion, be able to tell our own story in the media. So
to the Lions, Tony and Ron, thank you for telling the story. Thank you for all being here. Thank you to JANM. Thank you, Susan, for bringing us home. We can stick around, talk a little while, but thank you for being here.